Security! Seraphina Covington's voice was a venomous shriek that sliced through the polite hum of the Metropolitan Gala. Get this, monkey, out of my sight. You people need to learn your place. The words, sharp and poisoned, ripped the air apart. The string quartet stopped, their bows freezing mid-stroke. At the annual Innovators of Tomorrow charity gala, a $50,000 a plate event, 300 of America's most powerful people turned as one. They were witnessing something unthinkable, a brutal violation of the unspoken rules that govern their world. Seraphina Covington, heiress to one of America's oldest banking fortunes, stood trembling, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of pure, unrestrained hatred. Her face was a mask of privileged rage. Opposite her, Lara Vance was perfectly still. The dark red Cabernet, flung with vicious force, was streaming down her face. It dripped from her hair, stained the simple, elegant pearls at her neck, and pooled onto the priceless white marble floor. This was not just an insult. It was a physical, racist assault, executed with the casual cruelty of a queen ordering a beheading. Seraphina had done this because she saw an imposter. In her world, a black woman, dressed with such understated elegance, could not possibly be a guest. She had to be the help, or worse, a diversity hire who had forgotten her place. Seraphina expected the woman to cry, to scream, to shrink. She expected humiliation. She did not expect the terrifying calm that met her. Lara Vance did not flinch. She slowly, deliberately lifted a silk napkin from the table beside her and dabbed at her cheek. Her eyes, clear and cold, never left Seraphina's. "Are you quite finished, Mrs. Covington?" The voice was low, professional, and it carried across the dead silent room like a gavel strike. Seraphina's smugness flickered. "How does this, creature, know my name?" Across the room, Seraphina's husband, Arthur, was frozen in a silent scream. He recognized the woman his wife had just assaulted. He recognized the face he had only seen on screens, the face that held his entire company's survival in her hands. Seraphina Covington had no idea who she had just assaulted. She didn't know the woman standing before her was Lara Vance, the most powerful and private CEO in the tech world, the one woman on earth who held Seraphina's family's entire future in her hands. And with one word and one glass of wine, Seraphina had just lit a $1.2 billion fire and burned her family's empire to the ground. 24 hours earlier, Arthur Covington was staring at a graph that looked like a heartbeat monitor just before the patient dies. His 60th floor office in Midtown Manhattan was a temple of old money. The walls were dark mahogany, lined with leather-bound books he had never read, and a massive oil painting of his grandfather, the founder of Covington Holdings, stared down at him with severe disapproval. But the office, once smelling of success and old paper, now reeked of new panic. Arthur, a man in his 60s with a privileged demeanor but terrified eyes, loosened his silk tie. His CFO, Marcus, a nervous man sweating in his expensive suit, held the disastrous quarterly report like it was radioactive. "It's a bloodbath, Arthur," Marcus said, polishing his glasses. "Covington Holdings is a dinosaur. Our customers, they're either dead or they're shopping on Amazon." This was a truth the 60-plus generation knew well, having watched their own beloved department stores vanish. "The banks are calling in our loans. If we don't secure this acquisition by the end of the quarter, we are filing for Chapter 11. Bankruptcy." The word hung in the air, grotesque and unbelievable. Arthur gripped the edge of his desk. "And Vance Innovations? They're still our only hope." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "They're the only ones. This Lara Vance, she's a ghost, a genius, but a ghost. She wants our physical store locations to build her new tech retail model. She's offering $1.2 billion. Arthur let out a shaky breath. "It's not just a fair offer, Arthur. It's a miracle. Our company is worthless on paper." Arthur straightened his suit jacket, trying to reclaim some composure. "But she's reclusive. We've never met her in person, just video calls. What if she changes her mind?" Marcus looked him in the eye. "Then Covington Holdings is history. Everything hinges on tonight's gala. It's her first major public appearance. You must charm her, Arthur. You must get her to sign. Seraphina, will she be under control?" Arthur's face tightened instantly. Seraphina knows what's at stake. She will behave. But as Marcus left the office, Arthur looked at a framed photo of his smiling, imperious wife on his desk. He knew with a certainty that chilled his blood that she was his single greatest liability. I simply will not be seated next to new money, darling. It's dreadfully tacky. Seraphina Covington was on the phone, her voice carrying across her opulent, all-white dressing room in their Upper East Side penthouse. It was 5:01 p.m., 4 hours before the gala, and Seraphina was in full empress mode. She was in a silk robe sipping champagne, while a team of assistants, a makeup artist, and a hairdresser worked on her with silent, practiced movements. Her socialite friend Brenda was on speakerphone. And the guest list this year, Brenda, a complete and utter catastrophe. Seraphina fumed, gesturing with her champagne flute. They've let in everyone. Tech billionaires who dress in hoodies, influencers who are famous for being famous, and I heard the keynote speaker, that innovator of the year, is one of them. Brenda's voice crackled back. Oh no, Sari, not. Seraphina lowered her voice, though the staff, including a young Latina maid named Maria, who was silently organizing jewelry, could hear every poisoned word. Yes, some diversity hire CEO from California. Ilara Vance, can you imagine? They're probably giving her the award just to fill a quota. It's pathetic. The standards are just gone. Seraphina scoffed, reveling in her own disdain. Arthur is terrified of her. Apparently, she holds our family's entire fortune in her in her hands. He told me I must be polite, as if I don't know how to handle the help. At that moment, Maria, the maid, gently placed a heavy diamond necklace on the vanity, her hand accidentally brushing Seraphina's arm. Seraphina swatted her hand away without even looking. Idiot, be careful. Your hands are rough. Go polish the silver. Maria flinched, her face flushing with humiliation. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Covington. Yes, ma'am. She scurried out of the room. Seraphina didn't give her a second thought, turning back to the phone. Don't worry, darling. I'll smile. I'll nod. But if this Vance woman gets out of line, I will put her right back in her place. Someone has to maintain standards after all. It's our duty. She hangs up, looks at her flawless reflection in the mirror, and smiles. Show time, she whispers. The black Rolls Royce pulled up to the red carpet at the Met, and Arthur Covington took a deep breath, turning to his wife. Now remember, Seraphina, polite, that's all I ask. Please. His voice was low, almost begging. He was a man drowning, and his wife was holding an anchor. Seraphina, resplendent in a glittering, custom emerald gown that screamed its cost, simply laughed, a light, airy sound that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, darling. When am I ever not polite? She kissed the air near his cheek, careful not to smudge her makeup. The car door was opened, and she stepped out. The effect was instantaneous. The air exploded with flashing cameras and the shouts of reporters. Seraphina, Mrs. Covington, over here. She glided down the carpet, a perfect picture of high society grace, beaming for the cameras. This was her battlefield, and she was the conquering general. Arthur followed, his own perfectly tailored tux feeling like a straitjacket. His smile was a grimace of pure, unadulterated anxiety. He was already sweating. He ignored the cameras, his eyes desperately scanning the crowd, not for admirers, but for one face. The face he had only seen on a computer screen. Has Ms. Vance arrived? He murmured to a gala organizer, a young woman with a clipboard. The organizer shook her head. Not yet, Mr. Covington, but your table is front and center. Table 1. Inside, the main hall was magnificent, a testament to the power and wealth concentrated in that room. Arthur and Seraphina took their seats. Seraphina immediately began holding court, flagging down a senator's wife to gossip. Brenda, darling, can you believe the floral arrangements? She whispered loud enough for the nearby staff to hear. They're so loud, utterly provincial. Arthur didn't listen. He ignored her, his gaze fixed on the grand entrance, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He was a man on death row, waiting for the governor's call, praying for a pardon he didn't deserve. Then at 8:15 p.m., A woman walks in through a side entrance, and Arthur doesn't even notice her. But across the room, Seraphina does, and her upper lip curls in disdain. Elara Vance hated these events. They were an inefficient use of time, a peacock parade of egos and wasted capital. But $1.2 billion acquisitions, as her board had reminded her, still required a personal touch. She bypassed the chaos of the red carpet, using a private donor entrance reserved for the truly powerful, not just the famous. The gala organizer, Tom, greeted her with genuine reverence. "Tom, thank you for having me," Elara said, her voice warm but firm. He nearly bowed. "The honor is all ours, Miss Vance. The Secretary of the Treasury is at table 3 and is very eager to speak with you." Elara nodded politely, her mind already processing. Her navy gown, a bespoke piece worth $10,000, was deliberately understated. It had no sequins, no flash. She wore simple pearl earrings and a watch that was more impressive for its engineering than its diamonds. She didn't need to shout her wealth. She radiated an authority that came from building an empire from nothing. She began to move through the room. Elara didn't work the room. She held it. People came to her. A high-profile banker from Goldman Sachs cut short his conversation to shake her hand. A young tech billionaire, famous for his hoodies, actually straightened his tie before approaching her. Then Senator Thompson, a powerful 60-year-old statesman, saw her and broke into a huge, genuine smile. "Elara, my goodness, you look wonderful. Is your new reinvestment fund still oversubscribed? I want in." From table 1, Seraphina Covington watched this entire exchange. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Who is that woman?" she hissed to her friend Brenda, who was seated next to her. "The one in that boring navy dress." Brenda squinted across the room. "No idea, darling. Probably some new lobbyist. She seems to be bothering the senator." Seraphina's disgust was palpable. Bothering him? She's practically pawing at him. It's disgraceful. Look at her, working the room like a, well, desperate, tacky. To Seraphina, steeped in the racist and classist certainty of old money, a black woman being treated as an equal by a white senator was not a sign of success. It was a sign that the woman was a social climber, an imposter harassing her betters. Elara, oblivious to the hatred aimed her way, begins walking toward table 1, looking for her host, Arthur Covington. Ma'am, could you get me another gin martini? Very dry. And do it quickly. My glass is empty." Elara Vance was about 10 feet from table 1, having finally spotted her host, Arthur Covington. His back was to her, as he was trapped in an animated conversation with another guest. Elara paused, waiting for a polite moment to interrupt, when Seraphina Covington stepped directly into her path, physically blocking her way. Seraphina did not look at Elara's face. She looked at her dress, judging its simple navy color as staff-like, and then snapped her fingers, the sound sharp and demeaning. "You," Seraphina said again, her voice bored and entitled. Elara, thinking the woman was addressing a nearby waiter, glanced behind her. There was no one there. She turned back, her expression neutral. "Were you speaking to me?" Seraphina sighed dramatically, as if dealing with a particularly slow-witted child. "Yes, you. A martini. Gin. Very dry. 3 olives. And tell the bartender not to bruise the gin this time. I can't bear it." Elara's posture didn't change, but her mind shifted. She was no longer a guest about to greet a host. She was a CEO analyzing a critical, flawed component of a potential acquisition. This woman was Arthur's wife. This was a data point. "Ma'am," Elara said, her voice perfectly level and polite, "I believe you're mistaken. I don't work for the venue. I am a guest." Seraphina laughed, a short, ugly sound that was devoid of humor. "A guest? Oh, that's rich. Don't be ridiculous. You people are relentless, I'll give you that. Always pushing." She waved her hand dismissively, as if Elara was a fly. "Just get the drink. I'll even give you a generous tip for your trouble. Now scurry along." Elara's smile was razor-thin, a polite baring of teeth. "I'm quite sure you would," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "But as I said, I am a guest. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with Mr. Covington." "Ahem." She made a polite, definitive move to step around Seraphina, her gaze already moving past her toward Arthur. Seraphina was stunned. First, this nothing had ignored her command. Now she was dismissing her. Seraphina, enraged at being publicly slighted by someone she considered a complete inferior, reacted with visceral, possessive fury. She grabbed Alara's arm, her manicured nails digging into Alara's skin through the silk sleeve. "Don't you dare walk away from me when I'm speaking to you. Who do you think you are?" It's at that exact moment that Arthur turns around, sees his wife grabbing the arm of Alara Vance, and his heart stops beating. "Seraphina, no!" Arthur Covington's voice was a panicked yell, cracking halfway through. It was the sound of a man watching his own execution. He shoved his way through the small, silent circle of onlookers, his face slick with a sweat that was instantly cold. "Ms. Vance, Ms. Vance! My God! I am so sorry!" He reached them just as Alara Vance, with a strength that belied her calm appearance, gently but firmly peeled Seraphina's manicured fingers from her arm. Arthur turned to his wife, his voice a low, trembling hiss that was more terrifying than a shout. "Seraphina, what are you doing? What have you done? This is Alara Vance, the CEO of Vance Innovations, the woman I've been talking about for 6 months." The name hit Seraphina like a physical slap. This waitress, this nobody, was the reclusive genius CEO Arthur was so terrified of. The color drained from her face, leaving her makeup looking like a grotesque mask. But the paleness lasted only a second. It was immediately replaced by a hot, furious flush of pure, narcissistic humiliation. She had been made a fool of. She, a Covington, had been made to look like an idiot in front of her friends, in front of the senator, in front of everyone. Alara Vance, meanwhile, simply looked at Arthur, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Covington, a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Her calm, cool professionalism, her complete lack of hysteria, only made Seraphina's behavior look more grotesque, more low-class. Seraphina, trapped and humiliated, did what she had always done. She attacked. She could not, would not be wrong. "Arthur, darling," Seraphina said, her voice dripping with a venom that was meant to sound like concern. "Don't be fooled. This woman was harassing the senator, and she was incredibly rude to me just now. She's clearly an imposter." "An imposter?" Arthur repeated, his voice faint. He looked at Alara, whose face, once politely neutral, had hardened into cold, analytical steel. He looked back at his wife, his eyes pleading. "Seraphina, stop it. You're making a fool of yourself. This is Ms. Vance." But Seraphina was too far gone, trapped in a spiral of narcissistic rage. To admit she was wrong now, after grabbing the woman, would be an unbearable social defeat. She had to prove the woman was a fake. She had to destroy her. "Don't be naive, Arthur," Seraphina shrieked, pointing a trembling, diamond-encrusted finger at Alara. "Use your eyes. Look at her. That dress, it's navy blue, store-bought. And those pearls, they're tiny. She looks like a secretary." This was her logic, the unreasonable proof that would infuriate the audience. She was judging a multi-billionaire CEO's worth by the flashiness of her outfit. "A CEO? You?" Seraphina turned her full venom on Alara, her voice dripping with the condescending pity of old money. "Oh, I see. You're one of those diversity hires, aren't you? A quota." She practically spat the word. "A little charity case they let in to make the real tech billionaires feel good about themselves." How precious. The crowd around them was thick now. Phones were emerging, held low, recording. The silence was absolute. Arthur grabbed his wife's arm, his face ashen. "Seri, for the love of God, shut up. You are destroying us." Seraphina ripped her arm away from him. "Don't you dare take her side. I'm tired of it. I am tired of you people," she snarled at Alara. "Always pushing, always wanting what isn't yours, always taking places that belong to your betters." Alara's voice was ice. "And what isn't mine, Mrs. Covington?" "This," Seraphina gestured to the entire magnificent hall. "Our world, our tables, our traditions. You don't belong here. At that exact moment, a young waiter, barely 20, saw the tension and thought he could de-escalate. It was the worst mistake he could have made. He stepped forward, holding his silver tray. "Ma'am? Mrs. Covington? Perhaps a glass of water?" On the tray were 2 glasses of water and one full, deep red glass of Cabernet. Seraphina's eyes locked onto it. She looked at the red wine. She looked at Ilara's calm, composed, dark face, and something inside her, held together by threads of sanity, finally snapped. She picks up the glass of red wine. "You want to be one of us?" she whispers, her voice shaking with a terrible, thrilling power. "You want to sit at our tables?" "Security!" Seraphina Covington shrieked, her voice cracking into a near-inhuman sound. "Get this monkey away from my table!" The word, the ultimate vile racial slur, hung in the air, sickening and absolute. It was a bomb exploding in the silent, rarefied air of the gala. Even Seraphina's cynical high society friends gasped in genuine horror. Arthur Covington's face didn't just go pale, it collapsed, as if his very bones had dissolved. "Seraphina, no. My God, no," he whispered, a prayer to a god who had long since left the room. Ilara Vance's eyes, which had been analytical and cold, turned to pure black ice. The insult was so profound, so deeply violent, that it transcended business. "What?" she said, her voice terrifyingly quiet. "Did you just call me?" Seraphina, now completely unhinged, high on the power of her own cruelty, screamed, "You heard me! You don't belong here! You filthy imposter!" And with that, she drew back her arm and threw the entire contents of the wine glass straight into Ilara Vance's face. The splash was shockingly loud in the dead silence. The dark red liquid cascaded over Ilara's hair, streamed down her cheeks like blood, and drenched the front of her navy gown. She was soaked. Seraphina stood there panting, her chest heaving, triumphant. She had won. She had put the imposter in her place. The room was frozen. Arthur Covington looked at Ilara, then at his wife, and he made a small, hopeless sound, a tiny sob of a man who knew he was already dead. 2 security guards finally rushed forward, but Ilara Vance did not wipe her face. She did not scream or cry. She simply held up a single, steady hand. "It's all right, gentlemen," she commanded. "I am not in danger." The guards stopped, confused, recognizing the authority in her voice. Ilara then turned her gaze slowly, away from the panting Seraphina, and locked eyes with the broken man beside her, Arthur Covington. Her voice was not loud, but every single person in the 300-person ballroom heard every single syllable. "Mr. Covington, 24 hours ago, my board approved a $1.2 billion acquisition of your company. I came here tonight, as a courtesy, to sign the final papers and celebrate with you." She paused, letting the wine drip from her chin to the floor, each drop a hammer blow on Arthur's coffin. "Consider that offer. Rescinded. Effective immediately." She turned to her assistant Sarah, who was already on her phone. "Sarah, get the car and call our legal team. We are also filing charges for assault." As Ilara Vance walked out of the gala, wine dripping from her hair, but her dignity perfectly, terrifyingly intact, Seraphina Covington finally began to understand. But Arthur understood immediately. He didn't just lose a deal. He had just lost everything. The ride back to their Upper East Side penthouse was dead silent, broken only by the sound of Seraphina Covington's quiet, hiccuping sobs. They had been escorted out of the gala by security, not Ilara, but them. The shame was so thick it was suffocating. The Rolls-Royce Phantom, usually a cocoon of wealth and comfort, felt like a hearse. Arthur Covington sat as far from his wife as possible, pressed against the door, his face a mask of gray stone. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in the 2 hours since they arrived at the gala. He hadn't spoken a single word since Ilara left. Not in the ballroom, not in the elevator, not in the car. Seraphina, her $10,000 makeup ruined by tears of terror, kept trying to speak. "Arthur, darling, I didn't know. How could I possibly know she was really the one?" He didn't even turn his head. His gaze was fixed on the blurred lights of Manhattan gliding past the window. Arthur, please, she begged, her voice now desperate, pathetic. She reached a trembling, diamond-covered hand toward him. You can fix this. You can call her. We can apologize. We'll, we'll send a donation to her favorite charity. A, a huge donation. $1 million. Arthur let out a sound. It wasn't a laugh. It was a dry, humorless, terrifying puff of air. A donation, he repeated, his voice flat, dead. You think a donation fixes this, Sari? He finally turned to her, his eyes as hollow and empty as a skull. You didn't just insult a guest. You didn't just lose a deal. You executed the company, our family's legacy, everything my grandfather built. You burned it to the ground for a glass of wine. Seraphina flinched as if he had struck her. It was a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. No, Arthur said, his voice like ice. That wasn't a mistake. A mistake is spilling a drink. What you did, that was character. And it's the first honest thing I've seen you do in 20 years. The car pulled into their silent, private underground garage. Arthur got out immediately, without waiting for the driver to open his door, walking away as Seraphina called his name from inside the car. Seraphina sat alone in the cold, dark car, realizing for the first time that her husband wasn't just angry. He was disgusted, and he wasn't looking at her like a wife, but like a liability. By 6 a.m., the video was everywhere. Arthur Covington hadn't slept. He was in his dark mahogany home office, the one his grandfather had used, but now it was lit by the cold, flickering blue light of a wall of televisions. The sun was just beginning to rise over Central Park, casting a sickly gray light into the room, but Arthur didn't notice. He was watching his world burn. CNN, Bloomberg, Fox Business, even the local morning shows, they were all playing the same grainy, horrific clip shot on a guest phone. He saw it again and again, on a loop. Seraphina's face twisted with ugly rage. He heard her voice, high and shrill. Get this monkey away from my table. He saw the shocking splash of red wine. And then he saw Laura Vance's devastating, dignified calm as she delivered the final blow. The internet was a digital guillotine. The hashtags were already trending worldwide. Seraphina Galagate, Seraphina Covington collapse, Seraphina Covington is sorry racist. His phone, which had been buzzing nonstop with calls from lawyers and board members, rang with a priority tone. It was Marcus, his CFO. Arthur put it on speakerphone. Arthur, it's a catastrophe. It's apocalyptic. Marcus's voice was cracking. The pre-market is open in Tokyo. Our stock, Arthur, it's down 78%. We've been wiped out. The banks, they're calling in our credit lines. They saw the assault charge. They're enacting the character clause in our loan agreements. We're insolvent. We're done, Arthur. The company is insolvent as of 9:31 a.m. when the NYSE opens. It's over. On CNN, a stern-faced anchor read a statement. We have just received a statement from Vance Innovations. Vance Innovations confirms that all negotiations with Covington Holdings have been terminated indefinitely, citing a fundamental misalignment of corporate values and character. Arthur slammed his hand on the desk, a single sharp crack in the dark. At that exact moment, his private line rang, a number he hadn't seen in 6 months. It was his father, the 90-year-old patriarch of the family, calling from his retirement home in Palm Beach. Arthur, his hand trembling, picked it up. Father, I can explain. He was cut off by a weak, reedy, furious voice that rasped through the speaker. You let that woman destroy us. The line went dead. Arthur slowly hangs up the phone. He stares at the dead line, his entire body numb. He looks up as Seraphina enters the office, wrapped in a fresh silk robe, her eyes puffy from crying. Darling, she starts, I've been thinking. Get out, Arthur whispers. What did you say? Seraphina asked, a small, nervous laugh fluttering in her throat. She tried to arrange her face into a look of wifely concern, but her eyes were wide with a new, unfamiliar terror. Arthur, darling, this is no time for jokes. I've been thinking. Get out. Arthur Covington stood up, his movement slow and deliberate, like an old man. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical rage that was far more frightening. Not just out of this office, out of this house, out of my life. The blood drained from Seraphina's face. The reality of her situation was finally, truly landing. Arthur, don't be absurd, she said, her voice shaking. We're in trouble. This is when families need to stick together. We'll fight this. We'll issue an apology. I'll say I was unwell. Yes, that's it. I was on new medication. Arthur's voice exploded, a roar of pure, unleashed fury that made Seraphina physically recoil. There is no we. There is you. You did this. You with your poison, your hatred, your snobbery. I begged you. I begged you to be polite for one night. That's all you had to do. How was I supposed to know who she was? Seraphina screamed back, her own terror turning to defensive rage. She's a black woman in a simple dress. She looked like the help. Arthur stopped. He just stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. That's it, isn't it? He said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper. Even now, even after all this, you don't think you did anything wrong. You're just angry you insulted the wrong black woman. He walked to the intercom on his mahogany desk and pressed the button. Security, come to my office immediately. Please escort Mrs. Covington from the premises. Mrs. Covington, Seraphina repeated, confused. She will be packing a small bag. Her lawyers can contact my lawyers. Lawyers? Seraphina shrieked, the word tearing from her throat as she finally understood. She lunged for him, grabbing the lapels of his suit. You can't do this to me. I am your wife. I am a Covington. No, Arthur said, peeling her hands off him with a strength she didn't know he possessed, just as two uniformed security guards entered the room. You are a liability. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, Seraphina. You signed it 30 years ago, when you thought my family's money was endless. You get nothing. Arthur, you'll be ruined without me. You'll be nothing. Seraphina was screaming, her face purple with rage, as the guards took her by the arms. She was physically dragged from the office, her silk robe flapping, her feet scrambling for purchase on the Persian rug. Arthur watched her go. He was already nothing. The question was whether he could ever be something again. By 6 a.m., the video was everywhere. Arthur Covington hadn't slept. He was in his dark mahogany home office, the one his grandfather had used, but now it was lit by the cold, flickering blue light of a wall of televisions. The sun was just beginning to rise over Central Park, casting a sickly gray light into the room, but Arthur didn't notice. He was watching his world burn. CNN, Bloomberg, Fox Business, even the local morning shows, they were all playing the same grainy, horrific clip, shot on a guest phone. He saw it again and again, on a loop. Seraphina's face twisted with ugly rage. He heard her voice high and shrill. Get this monkey away from my table. He saw the shocking splash of red wine, and then he saw Alara Vance's devastating, dignified calm as she delivered the final blow. The internet was a digital guillotine. The hashtags were already trending worldwide. Monsieur Galagate, Shash Covington collapse, Shash Seraphina Covington as a racist. His phone, which had been buzzing nonstop with calls from lawyers and board members, rang with a priority tone. It was Marcus, his CFO. Arthur put it on speakerphone. Arthur, it's a catastrophe. It's apocalyptic. Marcus's voice was cracking. The pre-market is open in Tokyo. Our stock, Arthur, it's down 78%. We've been wiped out. The banks, they're calling in our credit lines. They saw the assault charge. They're enacting the character clause in our loan agreements. We're insolvent. We're done, Arthur. The company is insolvent as of 9:31 a.m. when the NYSE opens. It's over. On CNN, a stern-faced anchor read a statement. We have just received a statement from Vance Innovations. Vance Innovations confirms that all negotiations with Covington Holdings have been terminated indefinitely, citing a fundamental misalignment of corporate values and character. Arthur slammed his hand on the desk, a single sharp crack in the dark. At that exact moment, his private line rang. a number he hadn't seen in 6 months. It was his father, the 90-year-old patriarch of the family, calling from his retirement home in Palm Beach. Arthur, his hand trembling, picked it up. "Father, I can explain." He was cut off by a weak, reedy, furious voice that rasped through the speaker. "You let that woman destroy us." The line went dead. Arthur slowly hangs up the phone. He stares at the dead line, his entire body numb. He looks up as Seraphina enters the office, wrapped in a fresh silk robe, her eyes puffy from crying. "Darling," she starts, "I've been thinking—" "Get out," Arthur whispers. "What did you say?" Seraphina asked, a small, nervous laugh fluttering in her throat. She tried to arrange her face into a look of wifely concern, but her eyes were wide with a new, unfamiliar terror. "Arthur, darling, this is no time for jokes. I've been thinking—" "Get out!" Arthur Covington stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, like an old man. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical rage that was far more frightening. "Not just out of this office, out of this house, out of my life." The blood drained from Seraphina's face. The reality of her situation was finally, truly, landing. "Arthur, don't be absurd," she said, her voice shaking. "We're in trouble. This is when families need to stick together. We'll fight this. We'll issue an apology. I'll say I was unwell. Yes, that's it. I was on new medication. We?" Arthur's voice exploded, a roar of pure, unleashed fury that made Seraphina physically recoil. "There is no we. There is you. You did this. You with your poison, your hatred, your snobbery. I begged you. I begged you to be polite for one night. That's all you had to do." "How was I supposed to know who she was?" Seraphina screamed back, her own terror turning to defensive rage. "She's a black woman in a simple dress. She looked like the help." Arthur stopped. He just stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "That's it, isn't it?" he said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper. "Even now, even after all this, you don't think you did anything wrong. You're just angry you insulted the wrong black woman." He walked to the intercom on his mahogany desk and pressed the button. "Security, come to my office immediately. Please escort Mrs. Covington from the premises." "Mrs. Covington?" Seraphina repeated, confused. "She will be packing a small bag. Her lawyers can contact my lawyers." "Lawyers?" Seraphina shrieked, the word tearing from her throat as she finally understood. She lunged for him, grabbing the lapels of his suit. "You can't do this to me. I am your wife. I am a Covington." "No," Arthur said, peeling her hands off him with a strength she didn't know he possessed, just as two uniformed security guards entered the room. "You are a liability. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, Seraphina. You signed it 30 years ago when you thought my family's money was endless. You get nothing." "Arthur, you'll be ruined without me. You'll be nothing." Seraphina was screaming, her face purple with rage as the guards took her by the arms. She was physically dragged from the office, her silk robe flapping, her feet scrambling for purchase on the Persian rug. Arthur watched her go. He was already nothing. The question was whether he could ever be something again. It took Arthur 3 months to get a meeting, and it wasn't in a boardroom. It wasn't in any office. After liquidating his last assets to pay his lawyers, he had spent weeks relentlessly, humbly, sending messages not to Vance Innovations, but to the Vance Foundation, Ilara's philanthropic arm. He didn't ask for a business meeting. He asked for 5 minutes of her time. Finally, an email arrived with a simple address in Brooklyn and a time, 2 p.m. on a Saturday. He took the subway. The man who once had a fleet of cars now swiped a MetroCard. He walked 6 blocks in the sticky hot summer air, wearing simple slacks and a polo shirt. He looked like what he was, a tired 60-year-old man, defeated and anonymous. The address wasn't an office building. It was a noisy, vibrant community center. Kids were shouting, playing basketball in a gym, and in the main room, a dozen teenagers were crowded around laptops. Arthur walked in, feeling entirely out of place, a ghost from a different world. He stood by the check-in desk for an hour, patiently waiting, as a young assistant ignored him. Finally, the assistant looked up, checked his name on a list, and nodded. Ms. Vance can see you now. Ilara Vance was not in an office. She was sitting at a simple folding table in the corner, dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, helping a young girl debug a line of code. She looked up as Arthur approached, her expression neutral. She didn't stand up. Mr. Covington, she said, her voice even, you've been very persistent. Arthur stood awkwardly, holding a single rolled-up set of papers, the last remaining deeds to the worthless store properties. Ms. Vance, I'm not here to ask for the deal back. I know that's impossible. I'm not here to ask for anything, really, except to apologize. Ilara just looked at him, her gaze analytical, waiting. He took a shaky breath. What my wife did, it wasn't just a mistake. It was rotten. It was a poison in our family, in our lives, that I ignored. I enabled it. I was a coward. I am so deeply sorry for the humiliation and the pain she caused you. Ilara studied him for a long, silent moment. And the $1 billion? She asked, her voice quiet but sharp. I assume that's not why you're here? No, Arthur said, shaking his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. That's gone. Everything is gone. I lost my company, I lost my house, I lost my family. I lost everything. No, not everything, Ilara said quietly. Arthur looked up, confused. You still have your name, and you still own the one thing I was ever interested in, the real estate, the empty, rotting department stores. Arthur was stunned. They're worthless, he said. The banks wouldn't even take them in the bankruptcy. They're just shells, liabilities. They aren't worthless to me, Ilara said, finally motioning for him to sit in the small plastic chair opposite her. What if I told you there was a way to rebuild? Arthur sat down, his heart pounding for the first time in a year, not with fear, but with something else. Hope. 1 year later, Arthur Covington stood on a stage, not in a tuxedo, but in a hard hat. He wasn't at a high society gala in Manhattan. He was on a makeshift plywood stage in front of a repurposed brick building in the heart of Detroit. The air wasn't filled with the sound of a string quartet, but with the bright, brassy, slightly off-key sound of a local high school marching band playing Celebration. It was a bright, sunny day, and the crowd was filled with local residents, families, and community leaders, all cheering. This was the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Detroit Reinvestment Center, the very first of the old, rotting Covington department stores to be brought back to life. Arthur, thinner but looking healthier and happier than he had in decades, stood beaming. The mayor of Detroit, a formidable woman with a powerful voice, was at the podium. What Arthur Covington and Ilara Vance have done here? It's a new model, she boomed. They didn't just invest money. They invested in us. They didn't just build a building. They built a future. The crowd, filled with people who had already gotten jobs and training in the new center, erupted in applause. The mayor gestured to Arthur. Arthur, would you like to say a few words? Arthur stepped up to the microphone, his hands shaking slightly, not with fear, but with genuine emotion. Thank you, Mayor, he said, his voice steady. 1.5 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought my family's name was a curse. My grandfather, he pointed to the old Covington sign that had been lovingly restored on the brickwork, built stores. He built places to sell things. But today, with the vision and the grace of my partner, Ms. Vance, we are building futures. He talked about the 200 new jobs, the free coding classes for kids, the small business incubator that was already funding local startups. He wasn't a tycoon anymore. He was a community partner. As he spoke, his eyes found Ilara in the crowd. She was standing in the back, dressed simply, watching with a small, proud smile. She was not on stage. She had refused. Their eyes met, and he gave her a deep, respectful nod. She nodded back. It was a partnership of equals. As Arthur cut the ribbon, a local reporter cornered Ilara. Ms. Vance, you're the money behind this. Why aren't you on stage? Don't you want the credit? Ilara smiled at the young, ambitious reporter who had pushed her way to the front. The credit is in the ledger, Ilara said, her voice calm and clear over the fading band music. The building is open. The people are employed. That's the credit. The reporter, sensing the human interest story slipping away, hurried after her as she walked toward her modest sedan. But Seraphina Covington, the woman who assaulted you, the video, everyone saw it. She called you that horrible name. Surely you can't just let that go. Have you forgiven her? Ilara stopped for a moment, not annoyed, but considering the question seriously, as if it were a complex data point. Forgiveness is a complicated word, young lady, she said, her voice thoughtful, not cold. I'm an investor. I look at ledgers. When I first looked at Covington Holdings, its ledger was deep in the red financially, but more importantly, morally. What we did here, this isn't about Seraphina. This was never about her. It's about ensuring that the assets her family controlled, assets built on an old broken, exclusionary model, are now used for a real purpose. This, she gestured to the bustling center, is how you turn red ink into black. This is how you fix the system. The reporter, desperate for the scoop, tried one more time, more personal. But we heard she's working in a public library in Ohio. Penniless. Her old friends won't even talk to her. Do you think that's justice? Don't you feel vindicated? Ilara looked at the new building, at the teenagers with laptops walking in, at the future she had just funded. Her expression was not vindictive. It was satisfied. Justice isn't about one privileged woman stocking shelves, she said, her voice firm. That's just a consequence. Justice is about who gets to sit at the table. Justice is about who gets funding. Justice is about who gets a second chance to build something real. She paused, then gave the reporter a final, definitive look. My company is now worth $50 billion because we invest in character, not just in assets. Arthur Covington learned that, and he's building a new legacy. As for Mrs. Covington, I truly hope she's found a good book to read. Ilara got into her car, leaving the reporter speechless, holding a notebook full of quotes about community, not revenge. Ilara had turned a $1.2 billion loss into a $1 billion investment in people. But there was one last piece of the story. In a small public library in Shaker Heights, Ohio, a woman with plain graying hair, cut in a simple, unstyled bob, patiently helped an elderly man use the computer. Her fingernails were short and unpolished. She wore a simple beige cardigan over a modest blouse, an outfit that would have once made her shudder in disgust. No, no, Mr. Henderson, Seraphina said, her voice soft, almost unrecognizable from the sharp shriek that had echoed through the Met. You have to click here to open the email. See? The little envelope. The man squinted at the screen. Oh, bless you, Sari. You're just so patient with an old fool like me. Not like those other gals always rushing. It's no trouble at all, she said, and offered him a small, genuine smile. Her old life, the penthouse, the galas, the diamonds, the power, the rage was gone. It felt like a different lifetime, a different, awful person. When Arthur had divorced her, and the ironclad prenup had left her with nothing, she had been forced to move in with her sister in Ohio, the only relative who would even speak to her. The first 6 months had been a private hell of shame and withdrawal. But then, broke desperate for something to do, she had taken the only job she could get, a part-time assistant at the local library. At first, the forced humility had been a prison, she, a Covington, stocking books and helping children with their homework. But after a year of forced quiet, of routine, of being useful for the first time in her entire life, she had found something she never ever possessed: peace. She would never be rich again. She would never be powerful. But the constant, burning, acidic rage she used to feel, the desperate need to prove her superiority, it was gone. In the end, value isn't measured by the diamonds around your neck, but by the character in your heart. Seraphina Covington learned the hard way that when you judge others by the color of their skin, you reveal nothing about their worth and everything about your own. Ilara Vance proved that the best response to hatred is not more hate, but to build something better. And Arthur Covington learned that it's never too late to earn a second chance. This story reminds us of an old truth. A person's worth isn't measured by the diamonds they wear, but by the character they reveal. In a single night, one cruel act of prejudice didn't destroy the victim. Instead, it exposed the rotten foundations of an entire empire. We saw that justice wasn't just about punishment for the arrogant, but about the opportunity to rebuild for a repentant husband and for an entire community. In the end, forgiveness and respect proved to be the most valuable investment of all, bringing a true peace that money never could.